Good morning, everyone. So we're almost halfway through the quarter. Next week we'll be halfway through. I can feel the vibe. Some of the sparkling enthusiasm is worn off. It's Monday morning on week 5, and people are tired, and I totally get that. And yet we're all piling it on, more and more stuff with the papers and stuff. And I understand that. I just want to encourage you to hang in there and push through. As soon as we get these peer reviews back, which are due this Wednesday, we'll have one last week. It'll be a week and a half to finish that paper, and that'll be off your list of things to do, right? So we'll, I've tried to stage it, and then we'll have a little bit of a break. There's going to be a great field trip, not this weekend, but next weekend down at Pewter Creek, which is a Saturday. It's your Saturday, but it's really fun, and it's a great way to blow off steam and hang out with people and laugh and just check out a beautiful part of the campus that we don't often get to, or many of you don't get to. So there'll be a little respite there. And then we have the midterms and the home run. And so anyway, hang in there with me, finish strong. Yes. Yeah, just wear layers, wear stuff you don't mind getting a little dirty. We'll have waiters for those of you who want to, go in and do seines and pull, or do electrofishing, backpack electrofishing. So we'll have some gear that'll keep you mostly dry, but you'll probably get a little bit wet, a little bit muddy, a little bit fishy. So be dirty, Yeah. Oh, they haven't been released. I'll talk to Rochelle about that and figure that out. Sorry about that. They were supposed to release right away. It was supposed to be automated, and yeah, I'll figure it out. Okay, so you should have read chapters 14 and 15 already. If you haven't, finish them up this week, okay? And I've also thrown another paper in there by Sommer et al., which is a discussion of habitat associations of split tail, which is a California minnow of note. And so I'd like you to give that a review. The idea of split tail being a minnow, which we'll be talking about this week, and how it basically lives in the estuary and spawns up on floodplains, up in the Yolo bypass and Sutter bypass, is something we're going to keep coming back to, like habitats, floodplains. We're going to have a guest speaker talking about floodplains who will reference this, and then novel ecosystems, which we'll be referencing a little bit later in the quarter as well. So it's a nice paper to kind of breeze through. Your peer reviews, again, are going to be due at midnight. Somebody asked me, what should I do with my peer review? Just, submit the peer review that you would like to get, not too long, but not too short, something that gives good advice and is gentle and professional, right? And then I'm going to have another quiz. Sorry, but I got to keep you up on this. This is going to be taxonomy through the Ostariophysids. And so this is a good chance to buff up on your taxonomy. And again, you're responsible for the orders that I discuss in lecture. And I'll be really clear in this lecture about what you'll need to know. And you'll need to know what characters define that order, what makes it an order. If you're not sure about this yet, if you're feeling fuzzy, and it only gets more complicated as we go into the Teleosts, get yourself flashcards and a friend, and just work on it, because the sooner you can put this in a context, the more sense it'll make and the less stressful it'll be. Okay, so that'll be Friday quiz, and then also on Friday, right after the lecture, 20 minutes after the lecture, 12:10 in the WFC teaching lab. There's an extra credit lecture. It's a Zoom lecture on ocean harvesting that Brian Williamson has set up. And you can go to the lab and watch it, or you can zoom in on it. If you zoom in and we see you on the Zoom, or if you go into the lab and sign up, you can get some extra credit for participation. Just a 5-point participation credit is available to you. And we'll have more of those coming up to do, for makeups and that sort of thing. Yeah. It'll be like 50 minutes, just that period, just that class period. Okay, so today we're well into the ray-finned fishes, the actinopterygians, and we're going to talk about teleosts today, which is the The new boned fish is what teleost translates into. They have a sort of lighter, more flexible skeletal structure that are a little more sophisticated than the neopterygian fishes that we've looked at previously. But I want to talk a little bit about fish art, particularly ancient Egypt. 5,000 years ago, Egypt's culture extends beyond anything we can imagine in the West. The Nile River, of course, was really central to this civilization. And so a lot of their cultural practices and art practices developed around it. They were relying on the Nile for flood irrigation. Flooding and drying and agricultural cycles are really important to the culture. And then, of course, they fished in the river for food, and they were one of the earliest civilizations to use aquaculture. And nutrients from the Nile is so important to the development of European culture in general, or Middle Eastern and European culture and North African culture, because those nutrients seeded the entire Mediterranean. It's the major river basin that dumps into the Mediterranean. And so nutrients would seed food web productivity, which then supported a really diverse and abundant array of fishes. And so it makes sense that some of the earliest forms of art that we see in Egypt are related to fish. Now, these are fish palettes for makeup prep. They're almost 4,000 years old before the present time, BCE, before Common Era. These palettes were found in tombs, and they were believed to have been the palettes used for prepping the bodies for embalming and preparing them for the afterlife, essentially. And these are probably both tilapia. Tilapia are still farmed around the world, and it originated, tilapia aquaculture originated in Egypt probably 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. And so there's many different versions of tilapia, or species or subspecies of tilapia, and they're one of many cichlid species that are found throughout Africa. And while originally they were important to artisanal fisheries, they began to be cultured, as I mentioned. And because of their fecundity, so these are mouth brooders. So the females usually, or not exclusively, usually the females brood the eggs in their mouths. And when the larvae hatch out and start to become free swimming, they'll hang in and out around the mother's head and then dart back into the mouth for protection. And so this became a powerful symbol of rebirth and fertility in Egyptian culture. And so we see a lot of tilapia on tomb paintings, on frescoes and bas relief, like you see here. These are tilapia. Also, this is another example. These are some wall paintings from another tomb, from the tomb chapel of Nebamun. And up in the upper one, you can see this is actually this is a picture of Nebamun hunting waterfowl in the marshlands. He's on some kind of a boat there. You can see his foot. And then below it, there's a few fishes. These are probably tilapia over here. I don't know what this is. It's a very interesting looking fish. But it's clearly some real fish. I just don't know what it is. And then there's also a fresco of Nabamun's garden in the afterlife, and there's a pool in it, and it shows tilapia again in that, along with some waterfowl. They use tilapia with glass to form these decorative bottles, which is beautiful and amazing. This is 1,500 years ago. Shocking. And then I have to tell you the story. This is the story of Osiris and Isis, the Egyptian gods. I don't know a lot about Egyptian mythology, but this story grabbed my attention because it's related to fish. And so the story goes that Osiris was married to Isis, and I think it was Osiris's brother Set murdered him over a dispute, I think, over leadership of the kingdom. These are god kings, of course. And he cut him up into 14 pieces. And Isis tried to find the 14 pieces and put them back together. And she found every single piece except for his penis. And the reason that she couldn't find his penis is because this little guy got it. And sort of the hilarious body folk tale behind this story of passionate love and reproduction and fertility that is very ancient and deeply invested in Egyptian culture. Anyway, the Oncorhynchus fish, or shark-nosed fish in Latin, is of the family Mormyridae, the elephant fishes, which we'll talk about today. And they have this long snout, which was apparently captured from Osiris, but is actually used to probe in the sediments for invertebrates. This fish in turn became sort of a sacred fish to the goddess Hathor. And so she's wearing, this fish in this case here is wearing this crown of horns, cow's horns, and a sun disk on its head. And again, sacred because Hathor was a goddess of, I believe, fertility and the afterlife. And of course, fishes are a powerful and potent symbol of that. And that symbol, of course, goes right on in through Christianity with the fishers of men kind of a thing, right? So we'll see that over and over again. Another fish, and this is on some ceramics. These are mullets that are painted on these ceramics. It's a marine fish or a brackish fish found in the Mediterranean. They've been a delicacy in Egypt for, again, many thousands of years. Unto this day, there's a dish that's celebrated. It's part of an annual celebration. And the dish is called fasik. And fasik is made from dried mullets. The way you make it is you take a mullet and you set it out in the sun on planks and you dry it for a few weeks. And then you take the dried mullets and you pack them in salt. And if it's done properly, you get this dried, salty, oily, pretty smelly, pretty intense delicacy that Egyptians have been eating for just, literally thousands of years. It's an ancient dish and they celebrate as part of their culture. And of course, the West picks this up because sometimes people die because, they get botulism because somebody messed it up, And I mean, we do the same thing. It's like Thanksgiving, right? We do the same. Here it's salmonella. Somebody ate a salmonella turkey or a turducken or something like that, and they went to the hospital. Well, once in a while, you have to be careful about your physique. People go to purveyors of fish knowing that they have good reputations, or they make it themselves. Anyway, the quote here that I love is this part here, where this guy was interviewed about physique. He says, "I don't like it, but I eat it." And that is just like, my family and gefilte fish. And I can think of just lots of, like in Shabbat, like we do Shabbat once in a while and eat these really bland symbolic foods. And, nobody likes it, but everybody loves it. Anyway, so physique, wanted to turn you on to that. So back to taxonomy and the hard stuff here. This is where we've been, right? We've talked about the agnathans, and we know that the myxiniformes and the petromyzontiformes are the hagfish, and the lamprey. Thank you. A little bit of a brain fart there. And we've gone through the sharks. We've talked about the holocephalian sharks, the chimeriforms. We've talked about the galeid sharks, and there's several families here that we've discussed. We've talked about the squaleid sharks, which are the skates and rays. We've talked about a number of those families as well. And you should be able to attach a common name or a body plan or a way of getting a living to each one of those order names, right? And then we looked at the Sarcopterygian, the coelacanthomorphs, and coelacanthomorphs, and the Dipnotetramorpha, the lungfish. And then we got into the Actinopterygia last week, where we talked about the Polypteriformes, which are the fish ears, the Accipensiformes, which are the sturgeon and paddlefish, the Lepizosteiforms, which are the gars, and the Ameiforms, which are the bowfin, right? So you should be somewhat familiar with that by now. You should be pretty fluent in that, right? And you can wait till the quiz is open book, everything's open book. But if you don't really know how it's all sort of vertically and horizontally integrated, you'll be forever looking for the names and you won't get very far. And even if you go onto chug.com and you pay $15 a month or whatever, they're going to give you the wrong answers. They're going to screw you up, right? So, and then you're not going to learn it. So my advice to you is make sure you've got this down, because today we're just going into the teleosts, right? We passed down through all these, the chordata, the craniata, the naphostomes, the actinopterygii, and now we're here on the teleosteans. And you're responsible for these orders, okay? A lot of different fishes. And so you want to be familiar with what each one is. And I'm going to go through them for you. You'll be surprised at how some of these cluster out. There's going to be some that are sort of notable. I'm going to talk about them more. But hopefully this will be less imposing as we go along. And what I'd like you to know for Friday is through the ostariophyzons. So that's that's all the families down here that are circled, okay? Excuse me, not families. You don't need to know families, the orders that are circled. In the lab, you need to know families. So just the orders that are listed here, okay? So let's talk about what makes a teleost. A teleost it translates into the perfect bone. These are the dominant living fishes today. They make up 96% of all living fishes. And their bone mass, one of the reasons they became so successful, note, is that their bone mass is greatly reduced. They have these fine rays and vertebrae that articulate together to create a lot of internal structure and strength with a minimum of weight, which became, as it turns out, very adaptive because they've been so successful. You find them in every imaginable freshwater and marine habitat, from small puddles to the marine open pelagic waters. And they arose from the Neopterygians, at least by the Devonian, but it was in the Triassic when they really, really became abundant. And the primary uniting features are the fact they have this very light, structured skeletal system, and they finally have a homocircle caudal fin. The skull has become even more elaborate than the Neopterygians. And I'm going to talk about those two features, the tail and the skull now. So the tail, the caudal fin, is characterized by something called the uroneural bones. And the uroneural bones are basically extensions of the neural arch on the dorsal side of the vertebrae, which is where the main axle of the vertebral neuron goes through. And those neural arches became very elongated, and they formed a structure that forms the upper lobe of that tail. And then attached to that are the hypoural bones. The hypoural bones are structures that support it below. And that combination of physical structure supports the fin rays, makes a symmetrical tail, and makes them very powerful swimmers who can easily navigate their environment. So the uroneural bones supported by the hyponeural bones. The uroneurals are derived from the vertebrae, the neural arches. The hypeurals probably evolved from like scales possibly, or other parts of the vertebrae. It's not quite clear, at least not clear to me. And then the skull structure, and we've talked a lot about the skull structure, and these fishes take it a little bit further. You know, we've seen the dentary bone, which is the lower jaw. When that dentary bone opens, the premaxilla slides forward, and the maxilla hinges up at the top and then articulates with the premaxilla way in the front, forming this giant sucky disc that they can use for suction feeding. At the same time, there's this plate, this series of bones here called the suspensorium, which can adduct away from the face, so move laterally away from the face, increasing the volume of the mouth. And that in turn opens up for the preoperculum, the operculum, these structures here, to move out and follow the suspensorium. And then the branchiostegal rays, remember those? Those are the rays down on the floor of the mouth. Those two can expand. And finally, the clithrum. The clithrum is the bone that is attached to the pectoral fins and to the rest of the skull. That thing moves back, again, expanding the negative space or the accommodation space. inside the mouth. So when they open it, all these things happen, and water flows into the mouth. And I'm going to show you how that works in just a second. Did you have a question? Have what? The lightweight bones, because it makes you fast, so that as a predator, you can outrun your prey, or as a prey, you can outrun the predator, right? So it gives you a lot of flexibility and a lot of speed, something that we don't really see in the neopterans. Think of the gars, the neopterygians, excuse me. Think of the gars. The gars are kind of like wait and see predators. You know, they're ambush predators. They wait for stuff to come to them. We've now come into a series, into a group of fishes that are really active in their environment, really mobile. By the way, you don't need to know all these bones. What you do need to know are the dentary, the lower jaw, the premaxilla and the maxilla, and the operculum. Those are the main structures that you should be aware of. And also the branchiostegal rays, okay? So, teleostean suction feeding. You got to see it. So we're going to take a chance on the video. And here it is. Look for the bones. Ah! There it goes. And see how the branchiostegal rays in the back there, how they flare out, and then they shove water across the gills and close up, and the little tetra gets swallowed up. So this, so that's how those bones work. And I've put in these videos here. They're from the Wainwright lab here at UC Davis. Dr. Wainwright studied fish morphology for many years, and they've done a lot of stuff on fish feeding, including these these slow motion, like 2,400 frames per second to capture these. I mean, this happens in just a wink. It's fairly hard to see with your naked eye. So I think it's the last one that it's the funniest and probably the most worth checking out, because he accompanies it to music. So in your spare time, you might want to check that out. And just to review, like what we're seeing here in the evolutionary, excuse me, my beard, the evolutionary differences that we're seeing here. So we went from, the Bashir up here on the top, which has a very tetrapod kind of jaw, right? That's the maxilla, that's the premaxilla in green there. And when it opens up, it just kind of hinges in the back of the head. They open their mouth as wide as they can, and they hope they get lucky. The neopterygians took it a little bit further, and they have the flexible maxilla that sort of moves down and creates a little bit of a sucky face feedy kind of thing, suction feeding. And now the teleosteans are taking it an extra step, because they've got this little part here in green. That's the premaxilla. Yes, the premaxilla slides off the top of the head. It goes out in front, and it articulates in two places with the maxilla that's behind it, creating this really big gape here, which is really like, if you're in lab, just look at the structure. It's bizarre, it's alien, right? And it works really, really well, because that suction feeding allows them to be effective predators. I talked about it again and again, and I'll keep coming back to it, because this is one of the main adaptations that different sorts of fish have to accommodate their specific niche or environment where they become successful. So let's get into some of the taxonomy here, some of the groups rather, and some of the information I'd like you to know. So we're, the first group here, Teleosts, is the subdivision Osteoglossomorpha, the bony tongues. And the order name is Osteoglossiformes. So it's very similar to the subdivision, makes it easy to remember. There's 4 or 5 different families. I'll talk about a few of them. They're mostly found in tropical South America and Africa. It includes the Arapimas, which is this beast here is an Arapaima. The Arowanas, these are the family names. The Arowanas, the freshwater butterfly fish, and the elephant fishes, which is that little guy that escaped with Osiris's unit. So the first group, the Osteoglossiformes, the family Arapamidae, the Arapimas, they're known. This is one of the most ancient groups of teleostean fishes, about 220 million years old. So that radiation back in the Triassic started here. They're giant fishes, as you can see in the picture, up to about 10 feet long, found in the Amazon and Congo basins, both sides of the Atlantic. And they have an adapted swim bladder still to breathe air, which gives them a lot of flexibility. They live in floodplain lakes. And so having a swim bladder that doubles as a lung turns out to be a really advantageous feature for fishes that either end up in low water environments or live on floodplains where suddenly, the floods come, the floods go, you're stuck on the floodplain in a puddle, you're not getting a lot of fresh water that's highly oxygenated there. So that swim bladder is a giant assist. And these are mostly supported by artisanal fisheries, artisanal fisheries are mostly supported by these fishes down in South America. Another group in the same family, or same order, are the arowanas, Osteoglossidae. These are also known as bony tongues because they have this very bony structure on the bottom part of their jaw. And they, like the ones that we just saw, have a swim bladder that's really suitable for low oxygen supplementation. And you can see that they have a superior mouth. Maybe you can see here, they have a superior mouth here. They tend to be surface feeders. They can actually jump out of the water and feed on insects and small birds. And they get to be quite large as well. They're mostly found in the Southern Hemisphere, in Asia, South America, and Africa. I think Africa, I could be wrong on that, but it's not critically important. This is the Asian arowana, which is found in Southeast Asia. Mostly know that they're tropical, Southern Hemisphere. This is the Pandontidae, the freshwater butterfly fish. This is another fish that has a superior jaw and is surface oriented. You notice that almost all the fishes, all three of these families are very much surface oriented fishes. These have large pectoral fins, and so they're able to launch out of the water and glide for about 2 meters across the surface, and they're found in West Africa. And then back to our friend the elephant fishes in the Mormyridae. These fish are actually really interesting. Now they're no longer up at the top. These are definitely benthic fishes, right? Their proboscis is designed for probing around in the sediments. They have this giant brain to body size ratio. It's like ours. It's like the brain body ratio of a human being. And the reason probably for that is that they have these they're highly sensitive sensory mechanisms, including electricity. So they have an electrical organ. So they generate weak electrical fields, not shocking fields, but sensory fields. And they use that to navigate their environment. And these are mostly found in Africa. This is Peter's elephant nose fish here. And the fishes that we've seen for the most part are widely distributed. Yes. So why are they communicating? Are they like swimming or something, or for mating purposes? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well said. Well said. Yeah, they're amazing little fishes. They yeah. I had one of these fishes in an aquarium many years ago, and it had it definitely had a person. So do fishes have personalities? Yes, they do. This one did. So those are the osteoglossiforms. Now we're going to go to the anguilliforms, and you could probably guess anguilliforms because we've talked about anguilliform motion, right? So in the suborder Elopomorph, there are 4 main orders that I want you to be familiar with: the Elopiformes, the tarpons, the Albuliformes, the bonefishes, the Nodacanthiformes, the deep sea spiny eels. But mostly, I just want you to be familiar. So there's a number of these families or these orders, right? But mostly I just want you to be familiar with the anguilliforms. The tarpons are a really cool fish. They're a really important sports fish down in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. They're really giant, beautiful animals. I've gone kayaking down there, and suddenly you look around and there's this giant beast swimming at high speeds next to you, and it's a tarpon usually. people will scream, shark, but it's just a tarpon. And then this is a bonefish, which is another big sports fish. And then there's these weird deep sea spiny eels that is so different than the others. But it's related to the eels in the other groups because all these fishes, their main source of, the main identifying characteristic is the fact that they all have these leptocephalus larvae. The leptocephalus larvae are deeply laterally compressed and very transparent. And so this is sort of the unifying feature of all four of these orders. So the main one that I want you to know something about are the anguilliforms, the eels, anguilliform motion. Anguilliform motion. There's about 19 families, 800 different species of eels. The one you see here is the American eel, and it's somewhat threatened. The characteristics of these eels is that they have reduced or absent pectoral fins. They tend to have no pelvic fins, but they have very long dorsal and anal fins. They are merged with the caudal fin, so that when they form these, their body forms these long sinuous waves, and that the dorsal and anal fins support that. And as one would expect from this sort of an animal, they tend to be nocturnal. They hide in crevices and they come out to ambush feed their prey. That is until they reach adult size and they go back to spawn. So their life cycle is very complicated and kind of amazing. They start life in the Sargasso Sea in the mid-Atlantic. And the adults go to the Sargasso Sea where there's Sargasso, the seaweed is very abundant, and they lay their eggs on the seaweed. The leptocephalus larvae hatch, and they began their migration as glass eels back to their natal rivers. Now, if you're an American eel, those glass eels ride the Gulf Current up along the coast of North America and then jump off at the rivers as they start to, and they'll go up to migrate upstream. If you're a European eel, it's a very similar animal, but you don't jump off on those rivers. You wait to take the Gulf Current up and across the Atlantic where you do the same thing. So their life histories have split such that one, they go past the same region, but one keeps going and the other stays, which is kind of phenomenal. And because, they probably have a close common ancestor, but they've diverged into different life histories with different subpopulations that are very, very distinct over the course of, I don't know how long. So once they get to the river, the elvers move upstream and they become yellow eels. And then sometime between 5 and 25 years, they mature and they hit the last stage, which is the silver eels. The silver eels, after spending all these years in rivers and lakes, start to migrate downstream and their digestive tract degrades. Their eyes get really big. They develop some striking color patterns, presumably for visual recognition of conspecifics. And they make the migration back to the Sargasso Sea, breed, spawn, lay their eggs, and die. And then the cycle begins anew. And this is called catadromy or catadromy. It's a catadromous life cycle where a freshwater animal goes to spawn in seawater. Usually the more common version is anadromy, where an adult form that lives in the sea comes up and spawns in freshwater. And that tends to be more common, and it tends to make more sense to me because marine resources tend to be less limited than freshwater resources. And yet, eels do it. It's not quite clear to me why, but it's a fabulous story. So, final group here are the Ostariophyses. The Ostariophyses. These are the fishes that you'll need to know for Friday. And let's jump into it. It includes the milkfishes, the minnows, cypriniforms, the knife fishes or electric eels. Sometimes knife fishes are called as the gymnotiformes. And then the pteraciforms are the pacus, the piranhas, and tetras. The tetras are common aquarium fishes you're probably familiar with. And then the siluriforms, which are catfishes. And so let me talk a little bit about what makes the Ostariophyse the Ostariophyse. This is a really huge group of fishes. It contains about 28%, almost 30% of global fish diversity. with about 8,000 fish species, and they include 68, almost 70% of freshwater fish diversity. So, you know, when these fishes tend to be some of the most common fishes you'll see in freshwater, and we'll see a whole bunch of them at Pewter Creek, to be sure. They're present all over the world, and these are the characteristics of these fishes. They have breeding tubercles, which help to identify breeding individuals, presumably to each other. They have a two-chambered swim bladder that's attached to something called a Weberian apparatus that helps them detect sounds. Inside the skin, they have something called fright cells, which comes from this fear scent that they release, presumably, called Schreckstoff from the German. And so Schreckstoff is released whenever one of these animals gets caught or hurt or injured. And their conspecifics can detect it, and possibly other fishes as well. So for Schreckstoff is a characteristic of the Ostariophyzons. And then they have this really highly protractile premaxilla that can extend and move. So it's just an extreme version of what we already talked about. So the breeding tubercles, here you can see them in a couple of different chubs from the Southeast United States. And the nuptial male here in the bluehead chub is really noticeable. They're not all over the body like they're on the stone roller here, but they're very prominent on the top of the head. Notable that the males often build nests and they guard the eggs. And so to some degree, those tubercles may be a sign to a female that they're ready. They've got a nest ready and they're ready to spawn. And they're available along with their nest. So it's a signaling of sorts. Schreckstoff is the scent release that I said when tissue damage occurs. And it alerts their conspecifics of danger. But the evolution of it is a little bit of a mystery, you know, because the dogma around evolution is that evolution acts on the individual, right? So how could you die? How could you be eaten and then somehow have this be an adaptive characteristic? Because you're dead, presumably not available to spawn. It hasn't selected. Natural selection hasn't acted on you. So there's a few different hypotheses about how this might work. It could be that, and I've got them in this little box down here, it could be that if you have a high degree of relatedness to a group of fishes that you're schooling with, that there's kin selection. So even though you die, you release this scent that spares your niece and nephew and your offspring from being eaten. And so it might confer some overall fitness advantage to your species. That's one hypothesis. It doesn't quite hang together, but you know, it's interesting. The other thought, this is a little even more far-fetched maybe, is that it's a predator attractant, that actually the mechanism of action is that once it doesn't always happen when the animal gets killed, it's just when it gets hurt. And it could be that the release of that scent attracts other predators that scare off the predators that are trying to eat you. So that's another thought, another hypothesis. The third thing is that it's some kind of actually, it doesn't even wasn't initially related to sensory, that it had an immune response, an immune response of the cells. And so it's just a byproduct or a secondary characteristic that alerts other individuals that something is going on. Again, that one doesn't really make sense to me, but I put it out there. And the fourth one, I think might have a little more legs on it. And that's actually that selection isn't occurring on the individuals that are getting hurt. That's just a byproduct of being hurt. They release mucus and cell leakage, blood and whatever into the water column. And actually the mechanism of selection is on the other individuals to be able to detect those basically injured tissues, the smell of injured tissues in the water. And so natural selection, it's not really selecting necessarily for a certain kind of smell, but it's selecting for a certain kind of fish that can detect the smell. Anyway, nobody really knows, but this is how a lot of people spend their time instead of watching football, which I can get behind. That's the kind of stuff I like to do too. So, and it's cool because we don't really know. It's something that, it's things that people are debating and thinking about. The double-chambered swim bladder is integrated with this structure called the Weberian apparatus. So here you can see the double-chambered swim bladder. The Weberian apparatus, and so this is the skull here. And here are the vertebrae up here. the first couple of vertebrae. The Weberian apparatus is this little thing here. And it attaches right up into the auditory system of the fish. And so the thought is that as sounds move through the water, it's picked up and amplified by this big balloon of gas inside the fish. And that amplified sound is essentially connected to their auditory system, and it allows them to be very aware of sounds in the water around them. And so these two features apparently really made this a very, very successful group of fishes, because not only can they smell fear, but they can hear it too. So they're very aware of their environment in ways that other fishes have not evolved. So the Ostariophyes, here's the relationships among the 5 different orders here. And we'll start with the Gonorhynchiformes, the milkfish. Let me just check my time. Oh, we're doing pretty well. So the Gonorhynchiformes, the milkfish, are notable because they're sort of socioeconomically a really important species. They've got 4 different families, 37 species. They originated in freshwaters of Africa and also Southeast Asia. That's not here, but it also should be. They're a little bit difficult to characterize. They may or may not be a monophyletic group, but based upon the genetics, they appear to be. They have a primitive Weberian apparatus, but the most important thing that I want you to know about milkfishes is Chanos chanos, which is a really important food fish. It's been grown for centuries, and it's really, really key to the aquaculture industry there. And here's a picture of an aquaculture operation in the Philippines, in Southeast Asia, and you can see that they've got boats out here. There's a pond adjacent to this dock here, and there's boats out here that are harvesting the fishes, and they're bringing them up and transferring them in to barrels to take them to market. And the cool thing about these fishes is that they're largely herbivorous. So they feed on string algae and phytoplankton and other algae, and they convert that to protein. And protein makes a big difference for people, especially people in developing countries. And so there's been, these are one of the fishes that are part of international programs to try to end hunger in vulnerable nations. And because of that vegetarian, or I should say herbivorous connection, these are prized fishes for that. A lot of the aquaculture that we do, as a footnote here in the US, tend to be piscivorous fishes or farther up on the food chain, right? And it doesn't really make sense, honestly, they're prized fishes, so we value them because of their, high flavor. But it doesn't make sense to go out and harvest trash fish, quote unquote, or feed fish by the metric ton at sea and then pull it back and feed your fishes in aquaculture, right? The reason that we put fishes like that in aquaculture operations is often because we've overfished them in the wild and we can't get them anymore. So essentially we're kind of fishing down the food web. The big ones, the big predators are gone. The intermediate species are gone. What's left are the kind of the basal species at the bottom of the food web. So we have kind of like some major issues, especially when it requires tons and tons of fossil fuels to be able to get those boats out there, right? So the beautiful thing about milkfish is that they're primarily herbivorous. Yes. I have no idea. It's such a weird name, huh? Anyone know? Yeah, I should look it up, but I don't know. None of the stuff that I saw directly, it might not be that they're, it's milk. It could be like a translation or something, The other group, the other order are the Gymnotiformes. These are the knife fishes, which include the electric eel, which is the most famous. They include 5 different families. These are common species. You'll see them in aquaria. They're really interesting to look at. They tend to hold their body very, very rigid. And they have this really elongated anal fin that comes up almost to the pectoral fins, as you can see in this picture here and here. And that elongate anal fin base just, it it just undulates. And so they can move, they can use it to slowly move forward and slowly move backward. And they can manipulate their body through these sorts of complex environments. I think one of the reasons that they might hold their body rigid and just use the fins is that they rely heavily on electric organs, and they're nocturnal. So they rely heavily on their electric organs to sense their environment. And it could be that by maintaining their body in a semi-rigid state, it gives them a more accurate picture, if you will, of the environment around them. Although I don't know that, I'm just speculating. And of course, the most famous one is the electric eel, found in the Amazon, which, yes, it can really shock you. And we talked a little bit about the electric organ, which is basically a muscular organ. And I'm not gonna elaborate on that any further. But suffice it to say that they can develop and store an electrical charge that can be released at once. The other order are the Pteraciformes. This is a very commonly known group. It's got 18 families, 1,700 different species. It includes the tetras, which you can see in the upper corner here. If you've had an aquarium, tropical aquarium, you probably put tetras in it. Piranhas, which I think everybody is familiar with piranhas because they're vicious killers that will cut you to the bone. Not really, but they are predators, important predators. And then the other terracins in general. So these are found mostly in tropical areas, both Southern North America, Central America, South America, and also Africa. And they tend to be air breathers. Most of them are carnivorous and some are frugivores. I was actually really interested to find out about the frugivorous aspect of these. So they're basically, they're air breathers, right? So that's a big heads up. They're floodplain fishes. And when, like, for example, in the Amazon, when the Amazon floods up, suddenly what was a river just becomes a massive, incomprehensibly vast floodplain. It's just like a lake with trees. It's gigantic. And these fishes move up into every aspect of it. And they take advantage of, insects, other fishes, vegetation, and even fruits. And so apparently some tropical plants have evolved a requirement that they be eaten and digested by a fish before they become viable. Much like birds do up here in North America. They have to eat, like milkweed seeds have to be digested before they're gonna be viable. And so apparently tropical plants do that as well, which aids in dispersal, right? Because you don't really want your seedling to be in direct competition with you if you're a tree, right? You want it to be dispersed elsewhere to enhance its ability, its likelihood of success. So apparently some of the Pteraciformes have that capability. That was really interesting. One of the more famous of these Pteraciformes is the African tigerfish. And this guy here looking at you with that beady look in his eye, he has this TV show called River Monsters, and he goes out, catches fish and stuff. And there's a segment where he's on it. But the cool thing about it, if you're into that sort of thing, check it out. It's pretty fun. But the thing about it are these amazing teeth, right? Their nickname is striped water dogs. They have these amazing teeth that are basically interlocking like scissors. They clamp down on each other. And so they're voracious predators. And then they even hunt in small packs. And they move up to 30 miles per hour. And it's pretty imposing. All in all, these are amazing animals, and they're quite huge. As you can see, they're like a meter or more long. And I note here that they're cannibalistic, just as a way of reminding me to tell you that often, top-level predators, fish predators, piscivores, tend to be cannibalistic, meaning they tend not to eat each other as adults, but they'll eat their own young. So they just don't discriminate. And so I put this in here. I'm not going to click on it, but you can watch it. There's no Australian accents and there's no bad music. And so it's safe to click on, and it's pretty cool. The next time we come, we're going to talk about the Siluriforms and also the Cypriniforms, the catfish and the minnows. Thanks, everyone.